Welcome to the Deeper Into Movies podcast. My name is Stephen T. Hanley. I'm the founder and lead curator of Deeper Into Movies. We are a pop-up cinema based in London and New York. Today on the podcast is independent filmmaker Nathan Silver. Nathan you may know from his movies First Street or Stinking Heaven, both highly recommended. And he's back with a new movie called Between the Temples. And it's beautiful. It's got a wide release. And I love to see an old head indie filmmaker really breaking through to the mainstream. Nathan and I have been friends for a few years. And it was so nice to sit down and chat about his career and his new movie, which is blowing up and getting great reviews, which is wonderful. Here is me and Nathan Silver. How's things with you?
They're going, it's been I guess over a month of press and stuff, so my brain is not in my head anymore, but can't complain.
I always thought at the beginning, what kind of teenager were you? What kind of things were you into and watching and listening to and getting inspired by?
Well, when I was it all kind of started when I was like 7 or 8. I like really got into Salvador Dali, and my father had been to film school. He dropped out, but that's like he still had this whole basically he'd been educated by Stan Brakhage and Ken Jacobs, and he still loved art house films. So he showed me Un Chien Andalou, the Buñuel Dali collaboration, when I was like 8 or 9. So that was like my first. That was the first film I saw, and the image of like the eye and getting cut by the razor blade got tattooed into my head, and I can't shake that movie. Behind me is a poster over there of it. It's extraordinarily part of the foundation of me, I guess, the absurdity of it all. And then I would draw and paint a lot, and so took a bunch of art classes and ended up taking one with this woman, Connie Lane. And I go to her one day because my brother, he worked in the music industry. He's much older than I am. And he brought home the CD he was working, it was like electronic music. So it was like dance music, but it had Rimbaud's poetry over kind of dance music. This guy, Hector Zazu. And I guess it's not really dance music. It's just like kind of like avant-garde electronic stuff. And he happened to bring this home, and I was like, I remember opening up like the booklet for the CD and seeing like a drawing of Rimbaud, and I was like, who is this guy? That was when I was like 12, I guess. And I went to tell my art teacher, like, I really like to, I want to find out more about this guy Rimbaud. And she's like, Rimbaud, I wrote my thesis on him. So she started telling me all about him, and then I read everything I could of him, about him. I started to learn French, like I wanted to be him. And then that was the beginning of it all. I feel like poetry. So it was like you have like Buñuel on one hand and then Rimbaud on the other, and those are my artistic parents, I guess.
Yeah, wow, these are really heavy foundations. I was waiting for my dad took me to see E.T. or something like that, but shit, you just fully went in on heavyweights.
But I love, I loved John Candy comedies. John Candy was for me when I was a kid. I loved Stand By Me. When I saw it, I wanted to recreate the train tracks in the backyard. So I had used anything I could to try and replicate it, so I could pretend to play act in that movie. So there were definitely there's lighter fare, although John Candy is at his best is there's a sadness to him that
always, for sure.
And Stand By Me is kind of it's there's a
Stand By Me
tragedy.
is so melancholy. The narration is so haunting and so there's so much yearning and nostalgia for that whole era and really
Yeah,
heavy.
yeah, it is really heavy. So I guess like
Yeah,
even the lighter fare was heavy.
we had this guy Joshua Eustace on the podcast who was friends with John Hughes's son, and through that met the OG John Hughes. And he said just before he came to his house with a videotape and said, "I've got a new cut of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and it's the heavy, depressing version that I always wanted to screen. Have a look at it." And then he
Oh,
died. He died a few weeks later, and so they never wanted to touch it or tamper with it. But apparently, there's the depressing cut
oh
out there,
wow.
which is
It's
which
really
is
a
what.
depressing movie. Like John Candy's character, like when you find out that his wife has passed away, like
Yeah, yeah. I think it's when even heavier and kind of maybe more meaner attacks from Steve Martin and stuff. Yeah,
oh
that's
I need to see that. I need to
yeah,
track
me too. That's one of missing holy grails of cinema right there, of the heavy cut of Planes, Trains.
that. Wow, that's like now that I know that exists, I'm I won't rest until I see it.
Yeah, I hate hearing about things. It's kind of like when I read on Wikipedia or things like there's that whole story of Friedkin was going to make that movie of The Serpent about that serial killer that was going through Thailand, and he said, "I need to make it, but it has to be an unknown as the serial killer because it would be so much more fucking creepy." And
Yes.
then obviously the studio were like, "No star, no movie," and it just got disappeared. And I was like, "What? That movie would have been so good." I always want to feed those scripts into AI and just like recreate this.
Maybe that's the only use AI
The only
has is
good use is of those. Or like when Bogdanovich was going to do Lonesome Dove or something, he had like John Wayne attached and all these goats of the Western era and stuff, and it got taken away from him and stuff. And it's like, man,
it's the all the
Bogdanovich doing a Western
I
epic would have
know
been spectacular.
the what could have beens of the world, what should have been.
Yeah. Or when you hear like, oh, so and so is going to play that character, and then the studio cut him out and replace him with blah blah. And you're like, man, that could have been something. It kills me. So when did you start making movies, or was there something you saw that made you think this is possible, or this is inspiring, this is what I want to
Well,
begin with?
I didn't remember this, but on at my ninth birthday, I actually tried to make my first movie. This ended up becoming a short later on that I cut it into a short. We were because the LA riots were all over the news, and I just turned 9. It was my ninth birthday, and I tried to have like my friends like reenact like scenes I'd seen on the news, and so this I made a short of like the footage that exists from this. So that was my first
My God.
film. Like because my parents had the news on a lot, so I just
Yeah.
remember it constantly on in the background. So that's the first thing I made. I didn't remember this until my father pointed it out to me and then gave me the footage. But
What does it look like? Were you like rating? What were you like rating
yeah,
the
it was like cops, and it was like some people. It was just a bunch of kids with guns and fake cigarettes. So
sounds amazing. Were you like
yeah,
pretending to loot places or
yeah,
set places on fire?
you
But
could
how
check
did
it
how
out. It's called Riot. It's online actually.
oh my God, I have to see that immediately. That sounds so crazy and problematic.
It's bizarre. I mean, because as a kid you have no idea
Yeah.
like the import of anything. You have no idea what the larger context of anything. You're just watching. You're just taking the news in and seeing these images that stick to your brain, and then I don't know, as it like what you actually do with them. So it's funny. It's like watching anything else. I mean, this is the problem with well, I guess there's no context, right? You're just being fed random.
Yeah, but I thought that when you said you were when you were looking at Salvador Dali and things like that when you're young, you have no context or for anything being too highbrow or a Strange movie or things like that. It was kind of when I was like when I think back when I was like 12 or 13 and like listening to Nirvana, then discovering like William Burroughs, and then going to buy Queer and Junkie and Naked Lunch or J.G. Ballard or reading American Psycho and just having no context that, this is really intense art or this is really transgressive. It's just, I think all books are like this. You have no,
Exactly. You
you have
start
no,
to just seek out these connections in the world when you're younger.
yeah. And when you look back, you're like, wow, I was a really precocious teenager. I was really putting my head in some heavy, when I was reading like Dennis Cooper, age 16 and stuff, I was like, maybe too early for this, but
Yeah.
you don't know any different. You don't know if this is a fucked up book or compared to what a John Grisham is or something. It's just
Absolutely. And also when you look at like the kind of heroicism you put on certain like literary types when you're young and you look at the lives they led, they were miserable. Like if you
yeah,
just think about like Baudelaire's life or any of the folks you mentioned, like there's some they seem heroic when you're a kid, but then as an adult, you're like, I don't want to be like, I think Baudelaire, like, did he like die in his mother's arms of like venereal disease? Like
yeah,
miserable life.
yeah. Or
Um,
even there's that whole period, for as much of a icon and cult figure Burroughs was. I remember speaking to Lee Ronaldo that I think they visited him in the 80s before he kind of came up again with all the grunge movement, who kind of brought him up again. He was like pretty broken, down and out. And,
yes.
he had a kind of resurgence, but it's kind of terrifying. You for such a heavyweight literary figure like that to be able to just dwindle.
Uh,
But I guess he's just living on book royalties and things like that,
yes.
which can't be that great a deal.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and then I guess he was embraced by a whole generation of
Yeah.
people. And I feel like didn't Kurt Cobain like do an album, like about a few songs
Yeah,
with him?
he did like an EP with like spoken word with him playing under it and stuff. And
I think
that's all you need. Just like
yeah.
the thumbs up from Kurt. But yeah, thank God. Yeah. But it's the same with like Hubert Selby Jr. and stuff. He was
Yep.
completely just living in an apartment block in New York and stuff.
And then Aronofsky kind of helped
Yeah, for sure.
elevate him back to, the public. So I suppose I was really into I was really into poetry. I went and spent a year abroad in France when I was 16. And I thought I'd go over there and everyone would be like a poet and it would be like this dreamland. And I went over there and everyone was just a miserable teenager, like
Yeah.
me. So
Universal, yeah.
so I was like, okay, well, maybe there is no land of poetry, but while over there, I ended up seeing I saw a bunch of theater. I saw some Strindberg, and I really dug that. It was in this small town in Brittany, or not small, but it's this college town, Rennes, and there was this opera house that would show movies, and they had a Buñuel retrospective. So continuing on the Buñuel line, I saw like all of his movies, and that's when I saw like Exterminating Angel and a bunch of his Mexican period, and I really fell in love with that. So I fell in love with those films. I fell in love with Strindberg and Artaud, and I then went back to the U.S. and decided I wanted to pursue like experimental theater. I I also like I decided I was going to move to New York. My brother was living in New York at the time, and I stayed in his apartment and went and saw this Richard Foreman play. Now that communism is dead, my life, I forget the full title, is meaningless or something along those lines. And it just knocked my socks off. And I decided I would one day like I was like, I have to figure out a way to work with him. So I went to NYU for playwriting and I interned for Foreman. And while interning for Foreman, he kept complaining about theater, how theater was, no one cared about it anymore. He'd always wanted to make movies, that I should really just get into filmmaking. And so around the corner from his theater in St. Mark's Church in the Bowery, wait, what the hell is it called? It's St. Mark's Church in the Bowery. Yeah. There was this video rental store, Kim's Video, and I took his advice and like just would I would basically he suggested I see Pasolini, Fassbinder, um, and the like, and so I watched as much as I could, and I fell in love with those films, and I switched my major from playwriting to screenwriting, and that was the beginning of it, I suppose.
Wow. Who was working at the video store at the time? Any
John,
oh, of course. Okay, great.
John Williams was working there. Um, but yeah, it's like kind of one of those circuitous things where you're just like, um, yeah, I mean, it seemed necessary. It seemed like I was always meant to like I always had film in me. Film. My
Yeah.
father went to film school, dropped out in order for my mother because she gave him an ultimatum, basically for him to break up with him because the school was too far from her. So it was always in the background, and then it was just, and then suddenly after, being around this theater veteran, it was foregrounded, and it was really, falling in love with like watching Fassbinder's movies really sealed the deal for me because there was something so tender and harsh at the same time,
Yes.
and that kind of mixture, just I was like, I wanna be able to work with that. I don't know, something about just humans on the screen and still being able to like having some distance from them, but also just fully embracing them. And that was how I started thinking about, the kinds of characters I wanted to populate my movies. And as soon as I got out of school, I made a few short films, and they were extremely scripted. And I then made my first feature, which was extremely scripted, and it was kind of I wasn't happy with the results. It felt like the direction felt heavy-handed. So I kind of went back to the way Foreman actually makes his plays, which is coming every day with ideas, feeding these ideas to the actors, seeing what the actors do. And I took that and basically applied it to the way I would make movies. And that happened with Exit Elena.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Mubi. Mubi is a curated streaming service bringing you the best in cinema. I've been a Mubi subscriber for years. I love the platform, and I want to draw your attention to the new Mubi release, The Substance, which is in UK cinemas from September 20th. And it's about a fitness instructor played by Demi Moore. She is back and she is turning 50 and worried about her body and her age, and she gets offered a new experimental drug. Does it go well? Of course not. It's body horror. So everything I've heard about this movie is great, and I'm going to go see it this week, and I urge you to go see it also. It also stars the great Margaret Qualley, Dennis Quaid, who keeps playing horrible, evil people, and I love this for him. And the director made Revenge. Did you see that movie? That movie was ultra violent and crazy. So go to trythesubstance.com for showtimes and tickets, and let me know what you think. And just going back for a second, what was the atmosphere or culture like in Kim's Video? I'm so I'm romantic to a video store that I never got to experience, but
Well,
I used to always frequent video stores.
I would go and spend hours there because there were like three floors. I feel like I would just like look at books and look at, you know, then listen to CDs and then go and take out videos. And it just felt, I mean, I think this culture of browsing, of like being able to go to a place and just browse for
Yeah.
hours, dead because I go into the city and I have no idea where to spend my time except like roaming through the streets of there's no place to like kill time or not even kill time, just like enjoy time like that. So
Yeah. Kind
it
of like
was
when I
a
used to go to Borders and just buy a coffee and take a book or expensive magazine
exactly
off the shelf and just beautiful. Yeah.
exactly. So it was
I,
kind of like just a treasure trove over there, and they had all of these probably illegal, you know, like they had these videos that you could find nowhere else, and you could find anything there. And that this was pre like Karagarga and whatnot, so you were just like you were at the mercy of whatever they had. So you would hear about these films, and hopefully they would have them, and they usually did. Sean did a good job of stocking that place with the most obscure stuff imaginable.
and how was he at that time? A lot of people say he was a very intense figure in that era, or
I I remember him just being kind of shy at
right.
that time. And he's a tall guy, a tall, shy guy. And I was an usher at Film Forum, which is downtown New York, but on the west side. This was downtown New York, but on the east side. And he would come and see movies there. And I remember the first actual conversation we had was about Peckinpah,
Mm-hmm.
because my father loves Peckinpah, and his father loves Peckinpah, and he was going to see a Peckinpah movie, and that was our first conversation.
And I was thinking, we discovered 5 minutes from my house there's a mom and pop video store which was completely abandoned, and every time we walk past, my friends would always say that should be your office, or I wonder what's in there. And then we finally something happened, and well, the shutters were down and all the glass was just completely covered over in black dust. But one day we went past and my girlfriend noticed that the dust is being cleared. And so we peered in and there was a completely untouched video store still
Oh,
inside, left from 2001.
oh my God.
And then we contacted there was a to let sign, so we made up this bullshit that, like, I'm a tycoon looking to buy some new property, and what's going on in here? And they said, well, the owner's vanished for 10 years. And because of that, the solicitors next door have had to take on the property and just get it rented, gutted, rented, and back on the market. So he just said, look, I don't know what Deep Print Movies is, but if you want to take any of the videos, be my guest, because we're just gonna fucking throw it all away. So you'll save me a skip if you take it all. So we went in and we just it was incredible. We filmed it all. We took a lot of the new release videos were gone, but there was just lots of great ephemera of like rental books and 80s movies and stuff. And we just similar to what Alex is doing at Kim's, just like
Yeah.
matching the tapes to the videos. And there was like sinister porn out back in a filing cabinet with a bootleg copy of The Exorcist. So we've put it all back up as much as we can in our local indie cinema. We they gave us the front, so we just put some shelves up and put like 300 titles out.
Oh, that's so cool.
But it got me thinking about, as you were saying, about discovering titles, and it's the same. I'm
Yeah.
kind of thinking with the Kim's videos on Instagram, that there's something I'm trying to process it. But it's something different to browsing titles and discovering titles that you wouldn't normally, that you don't get from scrolling, even though everything is pretty much on Amazon. But I don't know, I think your brain just does connections, or you see something and you're like, that guy, he was in X, and got me thinking about, whoever, and it's kind of
Absolutely. Because you're thinking about when you're browsing online, you're thinking it's in the abstract, right? When you're actually in person, it's this whole, I mean, everyone says
I
it's,
guess you are typing, you got to pull out a title to start with.
yes.
You can't just, I got to be searching for a certain Renoir movie or something. But I don't know, if you go to the letter, R or something, and then you'll be looking for that, but you'll see something else that will blow your mind.
Yes. Yeah. And it's, I don't know, that's something that is totally lacking now in the way we discover things, which is a tragedy for, I, I mean, my niece and nephew are like, preteens or, like they're like in their early teens and they just don't have that. Everything just kind of arrives at the door. So I guess my biggest problem is I just don't know how to like spend time to just lose myself in the day anymore. I don't know, that's
Yeah,
miss that so
I can't
badly.
lounge anywhere where everything's too expensive. Or I know I still
That's the
dream
other
about just hotels that could rent for an hour where I could just lie down and
yeah, like they have
turn
this
on
in
the TV.
Japan, right?
Yeah,
I need to go there.
there's somewhere to loiter or I don't know, have a shower and a nap and kind of that
Yeah.
annoying thing where you're like, right, I had a meeting at 2. I should be meeting my friend for dinner at 6. What the fuck do I do between 2 and 6? It's like it's so
I guess
neurotic, but it was
yeah,
like go strolling around Borders or reading a book and having a coffee or looking at DVDs. It was a beautiful thing.
I know, and now you just scroll on your phone. That's like that's the idea of that's you're like scrolling by scrolling. It's very sad. But yeah, I mean, so I suppose like some of my, this speaks to like why I use like older technology sometimes for my movies because I don't feel like new technology has it just new technology feels devoid of feeling, you know?
Hmm.
And like if you look at like Stinking Heaven we shot on like this
Yeah,
like
what was the format? I'm so fascinated by the look of that film.
it was this Ikegami camera from like the 80s, this news camera. And it was nuts. But as soon as you shot it, I feel like the first day the actors all felt like they'd been stiff on set. And then we poured into the room that night to watch the dailies. And everyone was like, oh, okay, it makes sense. Like, because the way it looked immediately, you could be it changed reality. And that's like we shot the latest one on 16 and we would get the dailies and it changes reality. When I shoot it in HD, I have to imagine in some future time I'm going to distort it some so that it doesn't look as harsh and you know as harsh and cold as HD is just inherently is. Um but we try that's why like even I guess Sean and I, like on The Great Pretender and Thirst Street, we shot digital or shot HD, and we use all kinds of filtration to soften
Hmm.
it, and mess with it, and then obviously like old lenses and such. But I I feel like this new reality, this one that exists on these like this high definition reality, is not one I want to look at or live in.
No, it's kind of like when you go past things being too sharp, or even I think when there's people even going past 4K now, it's like we don't need to go harder than that. I don't know.
No.
It's a strange thing. Or all my geek friends like you're upgrading to 4K. I'm like, Terminator 2 needs a 4K. I don't need to watch, Mikey and Nikki in 4K or something like that. Just so, fuck off, John Cameron. Let's go for it. But everything else is kind of like a Blu-ray is fine. It doesn't
Absolutely.
it doesn't need the upgrade and stuff. Was the Thinking Heaven camera, was that straight to VHS or did you have to have an
No.
extra?
So basically, we had an HD converter, and then we went into like a hard drive, more
Yeah.
or less. It was a pretty neat way
Oh,
to
so
shoot.
like a broadcast camera that would
Yeah,
go right.
exactly. Yeah. So basically, we just would then dump that onto, we would get handed off to the assistant editor, and we could shoot for like 2 hours or three. I mean, you could shoot for long periods of time with that thing with this little hard drive connected to it. So it worked out, but it was heavy.
Yeah. And that run from 2012 to roughly 2019, you were knocking out a movie every year
Yes.
in that period.
Yes.
Was that just necessity to sustain yourself as a living as a director, or did you have a plan just to be very prolific, or both?
Well, we were making them for for very little money, these movies, and a lot of them were crowdfunded, but it was because there was the fear of failure. I didn't want to think about the movie getting rejected from festivals, then if it got into a festival, getting no distribution. I wanted to just like think about basically have all my worries going towards the next project.
Mm-hmm.
When I finished one project, I knew that I had something else that was in the pipeline, so that I like my whole career didn't rest on making on this one perfect object. And it was all these attempts, and I really feel like it was, you know, trying things out and just, you know, going with my gut as to like reacting to the last movie. Like if one movie felt too soft, the next one would be harsh. Like I would react against the last thing I made. And working like that was extremely at the time extremely gratifying. It just, you know, I couldn't sustain myself. It was, you know, I'd make so little money off the movies. My, you know, everybody's rates were tiny, if if we even got rates on these things. So I had all these odd jobs on the side, and I was just, after a while of being on the festival circuit and shooting one movie after another, I got just totally burnt out, and I decided like I wanted to sit down and figure out how to make something larger, I guess, or, you know, just, or think like about what to do next, because I felt like I had exhausted this way of working. And then I had a script. Basically, I sat down to write a script with Chris Wells and John McGarry, and we finished that in 2019, and we were starting to send it out to actors. David Gordon Green's company was attached to produce, and then as well as Watching Square Films. So we had like all these great people involved, and then of course the pandemic hit, and that script kind of just died. But then it was about thinking, you know, it was more or less like trying to sort out what to do next. And Miramax got a new head of film right around the beginning of the pandemic, Wolfgang Hammer, and he had seen my movies because he kept up with Richard Brody, and year-end lists and all that stuff. And he reached out to my agent, and then Chris and I wrote, like, he wanted to develop a movie. And so Chris and I ended up working on a script for him. And then at the same time, Adam Kirsch, who had been my publicist, for the publicist on many of my movies, as well as like a friend of mine, he found development money for Between the Temples for me and Chris to write that. So there was basically, we were writing two things at once.
And I was talking to Chris on Instagram because I love the movie so much, and I said, this feels like such a beautiful, small indie movie, which I didn't even think was possible to be made these days, let alone get a Sony as a distributor for. These are kind of like the golden era of a kind of Trees Lounge or something of that kind of tone, where kind of my favorites. So when you pitch it, it's like a middle-aged woman wants a bar mitzvah, or a guy runs a bar, and like, that's it. It's like, that's it, and it's beautiful. But I was wondering, how was it pitching? Were people a little bit warm to it? Did it get it, or did it take some convincing? That
it's a funny story because so it's based on I was shooting a documentary about my mother, and while shooting it, I discovered she was in a B'nai Mitzvah class. She was going to get her bat mitzvah. So I relayed the story a few weeks later to Adam Kirsch, publicist, and he was like, "There's a movie there." And I said, what are you talking about? He's like, you do like a riff on Harold and Maude, where like a late life bat mitzvah student falls for her younger cantor or rabbi. And I was like, I don't, that's not a movie I want to make. But this was like back in 2018 or so. And he kept on me about it and kept saying, like, you need to make this thing. I think that I have a feeling. And when the pandemic did hit, he was able to partner up with Leyline to get this development financing for this project. And I didn't know what to do with it. So I enlisted Chris, and I was like, let's crack this. And Chris is not Jewish. and he's not the biggest fan of Harold and Maude. So
Right.
it was kind of like we were because it was like this, doing thinking about it as this Harold and Maude riff was a bit it I couldn't see past that. So it was about like what other movies around that time or what other movies in general we looked to and we started just like we went from like The Graduate to The Heartbreak Kid and so on and so
Mhm.
forth to just screwball comedies like
Yeah.
Bringing Up Baby. And then it started to open up for us a bunch. But we didn't have to pitch it. It was basically something that was pitched to me by Adam Kirsch, and then he wanted this movie to see the light of day, and so he was persistent, and I'm extreme, eternally grateful for that fact because I ended up adoring. Like I mean, I love this movie, and I can't imagine the world without having made this movie. So, but Leyline, yeah, they were willing to take a chance because we from the get go there wasn't going to be a full script until we were shooting, so they went with that whole process with my whole way of working. So that was heartening, and yeah, we found good partners.
And before we go, we need to talk about your amazing leads. Jason and Carol are both spectacular in this movie. How did they come on board?
So it was written for Jason, and it just so happened that we had a friend in common. I'd never met him, talked to him. I always had loved him. And Damien Benar, who had been in my movie Thirst Street, and he was in Asteroid City, so he spent like a summer hanging out with Jason.
Yeah.
And Damien is this wonderful, funny guy, a very similar spirit as Jason. They're always making jokes, creating things. They're both always busy with their hands. So they even though Damien's English is pretty broken, they communicated beyond that and just I think Jace when Damien wrote to him and said you need to read this scriptment that Nathan is sending to you, Jason trusted him because
Right.
he basically just had faith in this guy because they had formed this bond. So luckily for that, and then it took months of talking it through with Jason. Recently, Jason described it as this thing where it was like getting a booster shot. He knew he needed it, but like he didn't want to like have to play this depressed character, but he knew that in the end he would do it, that he would have to put himself through this.
Mhm.
So it took a bit of convincing, but eventually, after we talked a lot and we really got along. I mean, our first Zoom was 2 hours, and we had like another Zoom 2 days later for 2 hours. Like he's just filled with stories and life. And I just love that guy. So once he was on board, we were trying to figure out who would play Carla, and I got married in Portugal, and while I was on my honeymoon, I had COVID. Everyone from the wedding got COVID, and I was like in a feverish sleep, and Carol Kane came to my brain, and I was like,
wow. Yeah.
he's
Perfect. Yeah.
Carla. And so I called my producers and Chris back home, and everyone was like, "Oh yeah, duh." She was standing right in front of us, and we were looking past her. And so luckily, she had always wanted to work with Jason ever since Rushmore. She
No
just loved
way. Wow.
So they had never met, and the first time I saw, we all three of us zoomed together. I knew there was a movie. It just, they were immediately. It was the two characters from the film.
And what's your favorite Carol Kane movie? I saw there was a really sweet Metrograph season. Did you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I adore Hester Street. I just think
Yeah,
it's
same. Yeah.
superb. I think she's just, it's heartbreaking. She's tremendous in that movie.
And what's next? Do you have something in mind? Do you have a?
Yeah, Chris and I have been working on a bunch of stuff. We like to it's almost like taking a college course each time you go into these different, because I grew up culturally Jewish, but I knew very little about how a temple operate, like the synagogue operated.
Mhm.
So it's always research, and it's like a pleasure. It's like, you're like going back to school. So we have a movie that takes place, like it's about like a croupier. Like, so learning about that. There's a movie about the opera, working on that. And then, and then we have this therapy comedy. So
Oh, sold on all of those. Green light,
yeah,
all of those. They sound Croupier sounds so cool. Is that kind
yeah.
of a Vegas movie or
Oh, it takes place abroad actually. It's in France.
wow. I'm obsessed with the Mike Hedges Croupier movie. Is
It's
that
so good. Yeah, I just rewatched
so
it.
fucking dark? Yeah.
It is so dark. I realize it's like a Bresson movie
Yeah, totally.
because it's very
And
much like you're just in his head.
I'm weirdly I'm always so pissed when I see my cousin. My cousin dated Clive Owen's brother back in the 80s. And I'm always looking at you like, what the fuck, man? I could have been like in-laws with Croupier and the version of men. And she's like, I'm a very happy woman with children. I'm like, I know, but the film geek in me just wants Clive Owen. At my like birthday parties and shit. It'd be so
That would have been, well, another version of life would have had that, I suppose.
I know. Maybe I'm also on the right course, but no, it's true because her husband saved my ass when I left film school and got me a horrible, super well-paid corporate job in an oil and gas engineering firm, which I despised, but it really cleared that student debt.
There you go.
There we go. Okay, this has been so glad. I'm so glad I spoke to you. I love your new movie so much. I'm so happy for you.
Thank you. This is a true pleasure.
Cool. Let's stay in touch.
Absolutely.
I'll leave you to it. Boom. That was me and Nathan Silver. I urge you to go see Between the Temples and check out Stinking Heaven and First Street. And Nathan has a really funny documentary series about him and his mother because his mom gets cast in his movies but often gets her roles cut down or scenes cut, and she's never happy about it. It's a really funny mother-son doc. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Joshua Eustace, aka Telephone Tel Aviv, for my beautiful music. And you guys for listening. Remember, if you enjoy the pod, like and subscribe. It really helps with the listening figures, and the bigger the pod gets, the bigger the guest gets. Okay, we'll speak soon.